The tension in the air was palpable. The producers of The View knew exactly what they were doing when they invited White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt to their studio. The daytime talk show, notorious for its confrontational debates, was a battlefield where conservatives often found themselves outnumbered. Yet, Karoline, sharp-witted and unshaken, accepted the invitation without hesitation. The country was already in a state of political turmoil. With President Donald Trump's administration facing relentless scrutiny from the media and liberal commentators, any appearance on mainstream television was bound to be a high-stakes affair. Still, Karoline was no stranger to the fire. She had made a career out of handling tough questions with precision, and she was ready for whatever was thrown at her. As she walked into the ABC studios in New York, dressed in a sleek navy blue blazer, she exuded confidence. The audience, mostly composed of the show's liberal-leaning viewers, gave a polite but noticeably lukewarm applause as she took her seat at the table. Across from her sat the show's longtime host, Whoopi Goldberg, flanked by co-hosts Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, and Alyssa Farah Griffin. Whoopi, a Hollywood veteran with decades of influence, wasted no time in setting the tone for the conversation. She adjusted her glasses, leaned forward, and smirked. "Well, Karoline," Whoopi began, her voice dripping with condescension, "I have to ask, how does it feel working for an administration that so many people believe is tearing this country apart?" The audience chuckled, clearly expecting Karoline to fumble, to react emotionally, to crumble under the pressure. But Karoline just smiled. She had anticipated this. "Whoopi," she said, her voice even and composed, "that's an interesting way to phrase a question. I assume you're referring to the mainstream media's portrayal of this administration, not the actual work we've been doing for the American people." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Whoopi blinked, caught off guard by Karoline's directness. "I'm talking about what's happening in this country," Whoopi pressed on. "We have chaos, division." Karoline held up a hand. "Let's talk about that division. Who is really responsible for it? Because from where I stand, it seems like certain media outlets and public figures have spent the last several years fueling hysteria rather than engaging in honest discussion." The tension in the studio thickened. Whoopi wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not on her own show. The camera panned to Joy Behar, who pursed her lips in anticipation, ready to pounce. But Karoline wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Whoopi's. "You claim this administration is divisive, but let's talk about how division actually spreads. When a sitting president is constantly misrepresented, when policies that help Americans are distorted for political gain, who does that really serve? Because it certainly doesn't serve the American people." Whoopi narrowed her eyes. "So, you're saying that people should just ignore the things that your administration has done? The scandals? The lawsuits? The policies that hurt women, minorities, and immigrants?" Karoline tilted her head, amusement flashing in her expression. "Whoopi, you just listed accusations without facts. And I find it interesting that you bring up helping women and minorities, considering the Trump administration's record in economic growth, job creation, and small business support for those very groups." The audience shifted uneasily. Some clapped, while others murmured their disapproval. Whoopi glanced at the producers, signaling for a commercial break. She needed a moment to regroup. But Karoline? She was just getting started. The moment the cameras came back from commercial break, Whoopi Goldberg wasted no time. She adjusted her glasses, her expression hardening as she leaned forward. The audience, now fully engaged, braced for the next round. "All right, Karoline," Whoopi said, her tone sharper this time. "You say that the Trump administration has been misrepresented. Let's talk specifics. Let's talk about women's rights. How do you defend working for a president who has made comments that many women find offensive? Who has been accused?" Karoline cut in smoothly, her voice unwavering. "Whoopi, before you finish that sentence, let me ask you something. How many times has President Trump been falsely accused of things, only for the allegations to fall apart under scrutiny? How many times has the media latched onto a narrative just to later walk it back when the facts didn't support it?" Whoopi's lips tightened. So you're saying none of it is true? That every woman who's come forward is lying? Karoline sighed, shaking her head. I'm saying that due process matters. I'm saying that in America, we don't condemn people based on accusations alone. If we did, then Joe Biden, who has faced his own accusations, would be held to the same standard, wouldn't he? A few gasps echoed through the audience. The energy in the studio shifted. Suddenly, the debate wasn't so one-sided. Joy Behar, who had been waiting for her turn to jump in, finally seized the moment. Oh, come on, Karoline. This isn't just about accusations. It's about policies. You and the Trump administration claim to support women, yet you've worked against abortion rights. How do you justify that? Karoline turned her attention to Joy, her expression calm. I justify it the same way millions of American women do, by believing in the rights of unborn children. By recognizing that being pro-life doesn't mean being anti-woman. It means believing that both lives in a pregnancy, the mother and the child, matter. The room tensed. This wasn't the answer Joy had expected. But what about women's right to choose? Joy pressed. Karoline didn't miss a beat. Women do have a choice. They have a choice in the policies they vote for. They have a choice in the resources they seek out. What this administration has done is empower women to make informed choices, while ensuring that taxpayer money isn't used to fund procedures that millions of Americans find morally unacceptable. Whoopi exhaled sharply, shaking her head. So, you want to control what women do with their bodies? Karoline's eyes flashed. No, Whoopi. I want to defend the lives of the unborn while also supporting the women who carry them. And let's not pretend that the left truly supports all women, because when conservative women like me speak up, what happens? We get called names. We get dismissed. We get treated like traitors to our own gender. A few cheers erupted from the audience. Others booed. The divide in the room was now undeniable. Whoopi was clearly frustrated, but she wasn't giving up. All right, let's shift gears. Immigration. Your administration has separated families, built a border wall, and pushed harsh policies against asylum seekers. How do you sleep at night knowing children have been detained under your leadership? Karoline's expression didn't waver. Whoopi, I sleep just fine knowing that we're enforcing the law, that we're protecting American communities, that we're stopping human trafficking and drug smuggling at the border. And by the way, the facilities you're talking about, they were built under the Obama administration. Where was this outrage then? The audience erupted. Some clapped, others booed. But one thing was clear. Karoline Leavitt wasn't backing down. Whoopi Goldberg sat back in her chair, visibly irritated. The audience, divided in their reactions, buzzed with murmurs and scattered applause. This wasn't going the way the View's hosts had anticipated. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just holding her own. She was turning the conversation on its head. Sunny Hostin, the show's legal expert, decided it was time to intervene. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Karoline, let's talk about democracy itself, she began. This administration has been accused of undermining democratic institutions, of spreading misinformation about elections. How do you justify defending a president who has called the 2020 election rigged, despite there being no evidence of widespread fraud? Karoline arched an eyebrow, her smirk barely concealed. No evidence? Sunny, let's be real. Americans watched as questionable voting practices, ballot harvesting, and changes in election procedures happened in real time. Courts dismissed cases, but not because there was no evidence. Many were thrown out on technicalities, not on merit. Sunny opened her mouth to rebut, but Karoline pressed on. But let's set that aside for a moment. The same people who spent 4 years claiming that Trump was an illegitimate president, based on the Russian collusion hoax, an accusation that turned out to be false, are now saying we should blindly trust every aspect of an election? That's not how democracy works. Questioning results, pushing for election integrity, those aren't threats to democracy. They're essential to it. More cheers rippled through the audience, now emboldened by Karoline's stance. Whoopi, growing more agitated, tapped her pen against the table. So what's the endgame here? You're saying Trump really won? That Joe Biden isn't the real president. Karoline's smile widened. I'm saying Americans have the right to ask questions. I'm saying that election security should be a bipartisan issue. And I find it fascinating that people who questioned elections in 2000, 2004, and 2016 suddenly decided in 2020 that questioning results is dangerous. The studio fell into an awkward silence. The hosts exchanged glances. They had expected Karoline to stumble, to become flustered, to retreat into talking points. Instead, she was dictating the conversation. Joy Behar, always ready with a snide remark, rolled her eyes. You can spin this however you want, Karoline, but the fact is this administration is unpopular. People don't like Trump. They don't like his policies. They don't trust you. Karoline turned to Joy with a bemused look. Is that why millions of Americans pack stadiums to hear him speak? Is that why his approval rating among working-class Americans is rising? Or why minority communities are shifting toward conservative values? Joy scoffed. Oh, please. Karoline shrugged. The media can create whatever narrative they want, but the American people know the truth. And the truth is, people are tired of inflation, crime, and weakness on the world stage. They're tired of being told that their concerns don't matter. That's why support for this administration is growing despite the endless attacks. Whoopi shook her head. And you really think history will look back on this administration favorably? Karoline didn't hesitate. I know it will, because history doesn't care about media spin. It remembers results. The tension was now unbearable. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or boo. The camera crew hesitated on who to zoom in on, Karoline, confidently holding her ground, or the stunned hosts who had expected an easy takedown. Whoopi finally threw up her hands. All right, we need another break. But the damage was already done. The studio was buzzing with an energy that even the View's producers hadn't anticipated. During the commercial break, Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar huddled together, whispering hurriedly while Karoline Leavitt sat back in her chair, cool and composed. She knew exactly what was happening. The hosts were scrambling, trying to regain control of a conversation that had slipped through their fingers. When the cameras turned back on, Whoopi forced a tight smile. All right, Karoline, she said, her voice laced with frustration. Since you seem to have an answer for everything, let's talk about the real issue, character. Donald Trump has been accused of racism, sexism, and corruption. He has been impeached twice. And yet, you sit here defending him as if he's some kind of saint. How do you sleep at night knowing you're working for a man with such a, let's say, controversial past? The audience roared, some in approval, others in protest. This was the moment the hosts had been waiting for. They wanted Karoline to crack. But she didn't. Karoline leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Then, in a calm, measured tone, she delivered the blow that no one saw coming. You want to talk about character, Whoopi? She asked. Let's do that. Let's talk about how this administration has created millions of jobs, rebuilt the economy after the pandemic, and prioritized national security. Let's talk about how we've worked to lower prescription drug prices, negotiated historic peace deals, and stood up to China when past administrations wouldn't. Because character isn't about words, it's about actions. Whoopi's smirk faded slightly, but Karoline wasn't finished. And if we're talking about character, let's be fair. You and your co-hosts have spent years demonizing conservatives, calling half of America racists and extremists simply because they disagree with your worldview. Is that good character? Is labeling millions of hardworking Americans as threats to democracy because they support a different political party an example of unity? The audience was now split. Some clapped, others booed, but no one could deny the shift in the atmosphere. Joy Behar, now visibly agitated, threw up her hands. Oh, come on, Karoline. You're dodging the question. The fact is, Trump has been caught lying multiple times. He's been indicted. Karoline turned to Joy, her smile sharp. Joy, if we're disqualifying politicians based on lies and scandals, then I assume you also condemn Joe Biden for his false claims about his past, Kamala Harris for her inconsistency on criminal justice reform, And Hillary Clinton for pushing the Russia collusion hoax? Joy's mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't expecting that. Karoline continued, undeterred. The problem isn't Trump. The problem is the hypocrisy, the selective outrage. The media holds one side to an impossible standard while excusing or ignoring the failures of the other. And the American people see it. The energy in the studio was electric. The cameras cut to commercial, but the damage had already been done. Karoline Leavitt had come into the View's territory, stood her ground, and walked out unscathed. More than that, she had flipped the script, making Whoopi Goldberg and the other hosts look unprepared, defensive, and out of touch. Whoopi sat still, staring down at her notes as if trying to process what had just happened. Joy Behar angrily shuffled her cue cards, while Sunny Hostin leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, clearly frustrated. Meanwhile, the audience was a mix of stunned silence, scattered applause, and murmurs of disbelief. Karoline, unfazed, took a sip of her water and smiled at the producers behind the cameras. The segment had ended, but the real battle was just beginning online. The internet erupts. As soon as the clip hit social media, it spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was trending on X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. The headlines were brutal. Karoline Leavitt humiliates Whoopi Goldberg on The View. Trump's press secretary leaves The View host stunned. Whoopi Goldberg silenced after Karoline Leavitt's brutal clapback. Conservative media hailed Karoline as a hero. Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, and Candace Owens wasted no time praising her performance. Clips of her calmly dismantling The View's arguments were shared across Telegram, Rumble, and conservative Facebook groups. This, tweeted one user, is what happens when a conservative actually gets to speak instead of being talked over. The left has no answers when confronted with facts. Another comment read, Whoopi thought she could embarrass Karoline, but she got destroyed instead. She wasn't ready for a Republican who fights back. Even some independent and left-leaning viewers admitted that Karoline had handled herself well. I don't like Trump, one Reddit user posted, but I gotta admit, she made Whoopi look bad. The View hosts didn't expect her to come prepared. Liberal media outlets scrambled to control the damage. CNN ran a headline, Karoline Leavitt spreads right-wing misinformation on The View, while MSNBC called her performance aggressive and combative. Whoopi Goldberg addressed the backlash on the next episode of The View. Look, she said, her tone defensive. We invite people on this show to have discussions, but what we're not going to do is let them spread conspiracy theories. Joy Behar chimed in. That girl had rehearsed talking points. She wasn't here to have a real conversation. She was here to perform for right-wing media. But the damage was done. The View's attempt to spin the moment as a victory for their side fell flat. The clip of Karoline's calm, sharp responses was everywhere, and no amount of spin could change what millions had already seen. It didn't take long for Donald Trump himself to react. That evening, he posted on Truth Social, Karoline Leavitt just wiped the floor with Whoopi Goldberg and her failing show. These people don't stand a chance when faced with the truth. The fake news can't spin this one. America saw what happened. Great job, Karoline. The post went viral instantly. MAGA supporters flooded Karoline's social media with praise, calling her fearless, brilliant, and Trump's secret weapon. The next day, at a rally in Texas, Trump brought it up again. Did you see Karoline on The View? He asked the roaring crowd. She destroyed them. Whoopi didn't know what hit her. The crowd erupted in cheers. Karoline's next move. Back in Washington, Karoline Leavitt continued business as usual. When asked about the controversy by Fox News, she simply laughed. They invited me on expecting me to be intimidated, she said. Instead, they got a dose of reality. The American people deserve to hear the truth, whether Whoopi Goldberg likes it or not. And just like that, Karoline's profile skyrocketed. Her Twitter followers doubled overnight. Conservative donors and media figures took notice. Speculation began swirling. Could she have a future in politics beyond being Trump's press secretary? Some even suggested she could be a rising star in the MAGA movement, a potential candidate for Congress or beyond. Final thoughts. In the end, The View's attempt to embarrass Karoline Leavitt had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking her, they had given her a national platform, and she had used it to dominate the conversation. For conservatives, it was a triumphant moment. For liberals, a painful lesson. And for America, just another chapter in the ever-intensifying battle for the nation's political soul.